This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, yesterday we talked about the endo-abdominal fascia, also known as the transalis fascia, and I hope that yesterday's discussion gone a long way to clear a number of doubts about transalis fascia, because the interest in transalis fascia has been reignited, especially with the advent of laparoscopic surgery. Now, today we'll be talking about the endopelvic fascia. Now, a name which is, I would say, misnomer in the sense that it's part of the fascia that we're talking about. Now, just at the start, the disclosure that we had yesterday, picked up a number of figures and uh, photographs from alternate sources. I've given them proper citation references are there. And yesterday, just to repeat, a surgeon's practical point of view, the anatomical knowledge and concepts are very important. We all know that. And as was with the transalis fascia, even with the pelvic fascia, the controversies and variations dog this fascia also. And that's why, after going through a lot of literature, the optimal descriptions with best and easily explainable and pragmatic details have been picked up and would be presented today. Now, I would like to call it the pelvic fascia and the endopelvic fascia. Why? Because endopelvic fascia is part of the pelvic fascia. So let's talk about a simplified understanding. I'm not going to go into very great details about this fascia, just like to give you an idea what we're talking about. If you look at the fascia of the pelvis and the perineum, on one side is the peritoneum, the other side you have the perineal fascia. In between you got the pelvic fascia. Now pelvic fascia can be discerned as of two types. Number one, the membranous part or the membranous pelvic fascia, and number two, the endopelvic fascia. So that means that the endopelvic fascia, which is a broad term used for all fascias in the pelvis, should not be used as such. Because why? Because it's just part of the pelvic fascia. The membranous pelvic fascia further can be divided into two types, the visceral and the parietal. Both of them are membranous. The name membranous is important. The prefix is important, tells you that it is a fascia which has got a lot of fibrous tissue in it, and it can be identified as such, as a membranous structure. While on the other hand, if you look at the endopelvic fascia, you have the loose fascia. So loose endopelvic fascia, and at places this loose endopelvic fascia concentrates or condenses to form structures like, for example, ligaments, or it could be forming a number of other fascias which can be identified as such. So on one hand you got proper membranous areas, the other you got the non-membranous areas. Now the membranous pelvic fascia, the parietal and the visceral fascia. Now I've drawn this diagram after a lot of thinking, and I think this should go a long way in helping you to understand what we're talking about. Now let me tell you what I have drawn. Now this is the pelvis. This is a coronal section, the coronal section of the pelvis. And yesterday we talked about the abdomen. So we said the transalis fascia comes up to the ASIS and the pelvic inlet. And from the pelvic inlet, it then enters the pelvis. So what we have here is the iliopsoas, which forms just proximal to the brim of the pelvis. And then the true pelvis, then you enter here and you got the obturator muscle. So you got the iliopsoas and the obturator. And the transalis fascia creeps over these two muscles and then is known as the psoas fascia, or the iliopsoas fascia. And further down, it's known as the obturator fascia. That's one part. Number two, the fascia, the transalis fascia, as it continues down, in the region of the obturator, there is a thickening. There's a thickening known as B. That thickening is basically a thickening where you find a aggregation of this membranous structure. It's a thick area which can easily be identified. And this is the area which we know as the arcus tendinus levator ani, or the white line. Why arcus tendinus levator ani? Because this is the area from where the levator ani arises. The origin of the levator ani from the arcus tendinus levator ani, which is nothing but the concentration of the membranous parietal fascia. So this is the parietal fascia we're talking about. Why parietes? Because it is along the wall of the pelvis. Okay. Now, the parietal fascia, it is from the obturator, no doubt about that. It also sends out and offshoot over the levator ani on the superior surface, and it sends out a Why? Because, and send out the undersurface of the levator ani also. Why? Because the levator ani is not a complete separation, doesn't completely separate the upper part or the peritoneal or the abdominal part from the perineal part. So anteriorly it is deficient. So what happens is that this fascia is going to creep in front, and then it forms the undersurface of the levator ani. Now, if you look here carefully, you'll find this is a green structure and this is a blue structure. Now, why this difference in the green and the blue? For the simple reason that here, up to this point, there is an other congregation or aggregation of fibrous tissue. So one you had here, and here you have another one. Now, this condensation of the fibrous tissue is known as the arcus tendinous pelvic fascia. Why? Because the concentration in the pelvic fascia, there is no muscle arising from this. Instead, this forms the junctional point between the parietal membranous and the visceral fascia. See, the blue is the visceral fascia. Why? It is creeping onto the viscera. Okay, so this would make you understand in a proper perspective what we're talking about. So this blue structure is the peritoneum. We have the parietal membranous fascia, the green one. Beyond the levator ani, it goes and forms the wall of the, over the pudendal vessels or the ischiorectal fossa. And here you got the perineal membrane. It sets an offshoot covering the superior surface of the perineal membrane. So that is the parietal layer of the membranous fascia for you. The visceral fascia, the visceral membranous fascia, starts from the arcus tendinous pelvic fascia, and from here it then goes and coats the various organs. This part just shows the bladder. So you have, in the females, you got the vagina behind, and you got the rectum even more far posteriorly. So it's going to coat all the pelvic structures. So now we understand that the pelvic, the membranous part, the pelvic, the parietal part of the membranous part is going to line the whole of the cavity walls. And in addition, it's also going to line the muscles, including levator ani, and posteriorly you got the coccygeus muscle. We'll show you in one of the future figures. Okay, and that also partially. See, the levator ani covering superior surface only partial. The rest of it has been covered by what we know as the visceral fascia. Now, why this dotted line? The reason this dotted line is there is that this is a less dense structure as compared to the parietal. So here the parietal fascia becomes less dense. Similarly, the visceral fascia is less dense. It does not form a complete sheet. It is an interspersed sheet. Now, what is this yellow thing in between? Now, in between the visceral and the parietal, you got a lot of loose areolar tissue. So this loose areolar tissue is lying where? Between the peritoneum, between the visceral fascia, between the visceral and the parietal fascia, between the visceral fascia and the organ itself. Right? So all this loose space, whatever loose space is present in the pelvis, is filled up with this loose areolar tissue. Now here you would see that you got the femoral vessels, which tend to come out from here, enter into the thigh. Here you got the obturator vessels, and here you got the pudendal vessels. Right? So this now gives you an idea what we're talking about. So we'll be talking about the fascia, the membranous part, which is lining the wall. We'll talk about the visceral part, which is lining the organs, and in between we've got the loose, what we know here. So membranous, parietal, membranous visceral, and endopelvic. That probably helps you in understanding the future description much better. So let's look what the membranous pelvic fascia is all about. I told you the muscle. The muscles, see the parts of the levator ani and posteriorly the coccygeus. The three parts of the levator ani and the coccygeus, right? So if you see this white line, this is the obturator. This is the white line, is basically the line from where you have the original levator ani. So the parietal fascia is going to go up to this point. See this point? That's the parietal fascia. Now from here arises the visceral fascia. All this is membranous, the visceral fascia, and then it is going to coat all these organs. See, this is the bladder, the cut bladder, this is the vaginal, and this is the rectal representation. Okay, here also similar to what I have depicted, the parietal fascia, this is the arcus tendinous for the levator ani, and this is the arcus tendinous for the pelvic fascia, from where you have the onset of the visceral fascia, right? Going and covering the surface of the visceral organs. This gives you a side wall where from here the transverse fascia has come, enter into the true pelvis, and then it's going to line the margins. Here you got the obturator membrane, the greater sciatic and the lesser sciatic. So all this thing is being lined by what? The parietal membranous pelvic fascia, right? So it is going to coat the obturator internus, the levator ani, coccygeus, piriformis. All these muscles are to be covered, right? Visceral fascia, it is going to sweep medially, it is going to sweep to the midline from the lateral part, and then it is going to invest the pelvic organs. So as said earlier, the arcus tendinous pelvic fascia, this is the junctional area between the parietal and the visceral pelvic fascia. Okay. Now these figures may seem to be very which not easy understandable, but let me just explain. They're very easy figures. So again, let's come back to this figure: the ischial spine, the pubic bone, right? And here you got the arcus tendinous levator ani. So this is the obturator, right? See the obturator written out here, and from here you got the origin of the levator ani. See levator ani and the coccygeus muscle, all coming out from there up to the ischial spine, right? So the parietal layer is lining the whole thing and part of the levator ani. So the arcus tendinous that we talked about of the pelvic fascia would be somewhere here. That means up to a part of the levator ani would be covered by this parietal layer, and from there now the visceral fascia is going to start. That is shown out here. See this. This is basically the levator ani, and it comes up to this part from where now you have the tendinous arterial pelvic fascia. See the green structure? So from here, it is the start of the visceral fascia. Okay. Now, why is this known as a white line? We have been talking about the white line. The reason why you have this whitish thickening of the obturator fascia from where you, the parietal fascia, from where you have the original levator ani. If you look at this, when you view it from the outside, after the removal of the bone and obturator internus muscle, that means looking from outside, you remove the bone, you remove the obturator internus, and you have the line in front of you, it appears as a white line. That's why it's known as the white line. So it's a thickening. There's a thickening in the obturator fascia, which is part of the pelvic fascia, okay, the parietal fascia. Now, it also covers all these muscles, even the piriformis will be covered by this, right? Now, the parietal layer anteriorly with the part is deficient anteriorly. See, in the anterior part, the levator ani, there's a deficiency out here. In this particular area, it is going to curve under and go and line the under surface of the levator ani. See, pelvic diaphragm is deficient anteriorly, becomes continuous with the fascia over the inferior surface of the pelvic diaphragm. What I just now told you. This figure. So anteriorly, near the pubic bone, this fascia goes under the levator ani and then goes and lines the under surface of the levator ani. Okay, so that is how you can explain that. Now, sweeping posteriorly from the pubic bone, it goes up to the ischial spine. It will go up to the ischial spine somewhere out here. So it's going to go from the pubic bone to the ischial spine, and from the ischial spine, this particular area, the parietal layer now becomes almost fused with the bone. It goes and merges with the bone. So that if you try to separate the parietal fascia in the area of the greater sciatic or the lesser sciatic, you'll not be able to separate the parietal fascia. So it blends with the periosteum medial to the medial edge of the sacral foramina. That means these are sacral foramina. So it's going to start from anterior, go laterally, and go up to the midline out here, fusing with the opposite side, and is going to fuse with the periosteum. That means, which basically means what? That gives you an idea that whatever is coming out from these foramen, basically the nerves, would be lying under this fascia. Simple. So that means that the sacral nerves would be lying under the parietal layer of the pelvic fascia. See out here. That's what you depict. Parietal layer of the pelvic fascia. This is the fascia we're talking about. Coating the openings. The nerves are lying deep to it, and the vessels are lying superficial to it. Okay. So remember, the whole of the sacral plexus behind would be lying deep to the parietal fascia. Right? Now, what about the visceral fascia? This is a very good diagram which I happen to see, and you should stick to this diagram. It explains almost everything out here. Let me show you. So the visceral layer is again a varying density. Remember, I showed you that stippled line. Why the stippled line? Because it doesn't have a proper membranous structure. It is an interrupted membranous structure. That's stippled line. That's why varying density. and it has got a circular attachment where to the parietal pelvic fascia. We've told you that. And where is that attachment? We said that there is a thickening or a reaccumulation of fibrous tissue which forms the arcus tendinous pelvic fascia. Now let's look at this figure. Now see this figure. This is the tendinous arc of the pelvic fascia, and here you got the tendinous arc of the levator ani. So obturator membrane, from here the levator ani is arising. So up to here is the parietal pelvic fascia. Okay. Here you have a thickening which we talked about. That is the tendinous arc of the pelvic fascia. That means from here to here, you got a loose parietal fascia. From here now you start having the visceral fascia. So now just to remind you again, what is happening is that the transalis fascia, see, transalis fascia is creeping down out here, becomes the parietal pelvic fascia. This parietal pelvic fascia comes up to the arcus tendinous pelvic fascia and then becomes the visceral fascia. Is that clear? Is that clear? So this is the area where you have the origin of the levator ani. So this is the white line we were talking about. From here you have the levator ani, again covered by the parietal layer of the membranous fascia, and from here you got the arcus tendinous pelvic fascia, from where you have the origin of the visceral, and that visceral C is going to coat all these organs. It's going to coat all these organs, right? So it is stretching across the pelvis and it fuses with the parietal layer at the arcus tendon. Now see these two layers. See this layer and see this layer. This is the pubic bone, and here you got the ischial spine. See what is happening to these two layers? They come and fuse with each other in the region of the ischial spine. They fuse. So they fuse with the parietal layer at the arcus tendinous fascialis. That is the area where there's the ischial spine. Okay. And it provides a capsule to all. So now we know that the parietal layer is going to coat everything up to what? The arcus tendinous pelvic fascia. The whole thing is parietal layer, and beyond this to the midline and coating all the organs is the visceral layer of the membranous pelvic fascia. Clear? Right. Now let's go further. Now, where does it rise? See this pubic bone. So all these fascias are arising from the pubic bone. So back of the symphysis pubis, about 3/4 of an inch above its low border. That means the major part of the pubic bone would be above and the levator ani would be below. Okay, so that means the major part of the pubic bone would be inside the pelvic cavity. Only a part of it would be inside the perineal area. And then it gradually goes up to the ischial spine that we just talked about. Just another figure to make you understand this. From here to here, and then what happens? After ischial spine, then what happens? Then the attachment line of attachment goes up to the junction of the fourth and fifth piece of sacrum. See this junction? So from the spine of ischium, the line of attachment of the visceral to the parietal layer continues to fall until it reaches the midline, the junction of the fourth and fifth pieces of the sacrum. See this? So let's come back to this figure. So what is happening? The two are lying separate out here, they merge, and from the merging, then they're going to go up to the sacrum. So from the ischial spine to the sacrum out here, and they would be merging where? At the junction of S4 and S5. Okay, that is what is being shown out here. So arising from the pubic bone, covering the levator ani, or arising from here up to the ischial spine, and from here S4 and S5. Okay, this is shown out here. We don't see the arcus tendinous pelvic fascia. This is the white line from where the levator ani is arising. Okay. Now let's see what is the endopelvic fascia, which is the common name used for every fascia inside the pelvic cavity, which it should not be. So what is the endopelvic fascia? Endopelvic fascia, see, everything yellow is endopelvic fascia. This is endopelvic fascia. This is endopelvic fascia. So this is a meshwork of smooth muscle cells, ligaments, blood vessels, connective tissue lying between the parietal visceral fascia and underneath the peritoneum at places. Remember the first figure? Similarly out here, the peritoneum, the parietal, the visceral. So this whole thing between the peritoneum, the visceral and the parietal, all this structure is nothing but the endopelvic fascia. It is basically used as a packing material. It is packing the organs, surrounding the organs on all sides. That the urinary bladder, the rectum, the uterus of the females, and the anatomist uses the name subserous fascia, right? While surgeons, we as surgeons prefer the name of endopelvic fascia. So we'll stick to the term endopelvic fascia. Those who are studying anatomy should also remember that even endopelvic fascia and subserous fascia are common or synonymous names, right? Now, at places, I said earlier, this is a loose areolar structure with all these blood vessels, etc., etc., etc. But at places, it condenses, and in condensation does what? It forms two things. Number one, fibrous facial septae and ligaments. One we already talked about, the arcus tendus fascia pelvis. What was that? This is basically nothing but the condensation of the endopelvic fascia. This one, from where the visceral layer was creeping up. So that is one. So it condenses to form the fibrous facial septa like the arcus tendus fascia pelvis, and at others it also condenses to form the ligaments. And all the pelvic organs have got ligaments to it. All those ligaments are nothing but condensations of the endopelvic fascia. So what are these septae and ligaments going to do? Together they separate and suspend the various pelvic organs, and they maintain the physical integrity. Not only they, the muscles also have a major role to play, but the fascia too has got a substantial role to play in maintaining the position and the physical integrity of these organs. Laxity or damage to these ligaments gives rise to diseases, more likely presenting as prolapse or dysfunctions like urinary bowel dysfunctions or pelvic organ prolapse. So the fascia is important. Why? Not only for support and packing material, it also helps in maintaining the physiological integrity. It's not only the anatomical, it's also physiological integrity. It helps you in maintaining your proper bowel function. It helps you in maintaining the proper urinary function. It prevents the prolapse of the pelvic organ outside, right? This is a figure. See the pubic bone, puboprostatic ligament. I think we'll skip this figure. We'll come to the next one, right? So what is this arcus? So remember we said that the endopelvic fascia has concentrated, giving rise to fibrous and ligament. So let's see what the fibrous is all about. We've been talking about this arcus tendus of the pelvic fascia a long time, and we said it rises from the back of the pubic bone up to the ischial spine, and at this point of ischial spine it merges with the arcus tendus of the levator ani, right? Levator ani, arcus, and arcus pelvic fascia. Arcus levator ani, arcus pelvic fascia. Both them merge ischial spine, and from there together they go as a parietal layer and going and coating the sacrum, right? So this thickening of the fascia, it arises from the back of the pubic bone, about 4 millimeter lateral to the pubic symphysis. That is the pubic symphysis, just lateral to it, and covering, there's a large area of coverage, almost 5.3 centimeters. So the whole thing, that means a very thick fascia at this point, got a wide attachment, right? And this part, which we're talking about, the arcus tendus pelvic fascia, it is attached to the tendinous part of the levator ani by what? By the parietal fascia. So there is an adhesion between the two. It's not that the two are lying separately. They are attached by a flimsy layer of parietal fascia, and that helps, that gives support to it, right? So with this, it is attached even to the levator ani, it's attached to the obturator internus, and even to the obturator membrane, which is somewhere in this region. Okay, and medially what is doing? So laterally, so it is attached anteriorly, posteriorly, here, laterally, and medially what is doing? Medially, it is anchoring the posterior lateral surface of the urethra, and more precisely the vagina in females, when it is diverging towards the ischial spine. So this central part, the anterior and the medial segment of the abdomen, is now being supported properly by the arcus tendinous of the fascia pelvis, or PATFP. The posterior attachment, we said, attaches to the medial surface of the ischial spine, and this posterior third of the arcus, this posterior third, this is the posterior third, right? With the levator ani, we already said that. It is very easy to recognize this. It's very, very thick. And one thing which is very important out here is that this junction is lying 1 centimeter above and 2 centimeter in front of the ischial spine. And why is it important? See the pudendal vessels out here. See the pudendal vessels curving under the ischial spine. Why? Why are we worried about this? I'll just give you a reason for that. In one of the prolapse surgeries, when you're doing prolapse surgeries, you're trying to tighten this pelvic fascia. And suppose if you attach a suture out here, you bite here, take a bite here and tighten, what's going to do? You're going to harm the pleural vessels and you're going to have troublesome bleeding. And that is why you have to remember that the posterior part of this arcus is closely related to the pudendal vessel. See this? So this, the black line is the arcus. From here is going to curve. See the S4, S5? So here, if you attach any suture, that means here, if you take a bite out here, you're liable to damage this vessel, the pudendal vessel. So don't do that. So whenever you're doing any kind of surgery, you have to be very, very careful that you have to be very careful where you're putting in the bites when you're doing any repair prolapse surgery. The superior margin median part is again related closely by the vessels for the obturator internals muscle. So vessels lying out. See the vessels coming out here? We'll show it in one of the other pictures also. Here also you can see that. The internal iliac, and this is the internal iliac, the external iliac, and from there the anterior, that's the obturator, and here you'll have the posterior division low down. So what is the applied importance of this fascia? We talk about this fascia so much. So what's the applied importance? You can see this much better. This is a bigger picture. So it is supporting. So number one, the applied importance is it supports all these organs, supporting all these organs. Number one, especially the bladder, the urethra, anterior wall of the vagina, especially in the upright position of the person. Number two, it is helpful when you want to repair the laxity. Why? Prolapse will only occur when you've got a laxity in this part or laxity in this part of the pelvic fascia. That means a laxity of the arcus tendus fascia pelvis. It becomes lax, it will not support, the whole thing collapses down into the perineum. So you have to tighten this. So it can be used, or it is used for the repair of cystoceles. It is used for the repair when you're doing a repair of the rectal prolapse, perineal repair of the rectal prolapse, or you're trying to repair a plain, simple urethral prolapse. So in all these conditions, the repair of the ATFP has to be done. That is what is done, and you have to apply sutures from here to here. See the opposite side, from one to the other. If you're applying sutures out here, you're going to tighten it. You're going to raise everything up, and that's what we were saying was the posterior part. You got these vessels. So whenever you're applying these sutures, be careful that the suture should always be in the anterior part. The posterior part, there should be no suturing. That is why care should be taken during repair and suturing to the anterior median parts. That means anterior median. Avoid injury if you so don't apply any suture posterior. So anterior median, you can apply sutures. Posterior, do not apply any sutures out there. The other third function of the arcus. So one, it is supporting. Laxity is going to give rise to prolapse. Number two, it also forms a conduit transmitting vessels and nerves along the pelvic wall. See these vessels and nerves, and that is what is known as the hypogastric neurovascular sheath. See the vessels coming, see the nerve, the yellow nerve coming from here. This is the arcus. See the arcus? So this is basically nothing but that part of the arcus which is carrying the blood vessels from the posterior part anteriorly. Because remember, all the vessels are entering in this particular area. The vessels are, because they are, after all, they are all branches of the aorta and tributaries of the IVC. They would all be posteriorly situated. So they have to enter the pelvis somewhere. So most of them would be entering where? In the posterolateral part of the pelvic cavity. And from there, they go anterolaterally up to the anteriormost part. So there has to be some kind of conduit. They cannot be just free flap lying vessel. So they are entrapped in a fascial entrapment, and that fascial entrapment belongs to the arcus tendus fascia pelvis, and that entrapment is known as the hypogastric neurovascular sheath. And that is why, remember, do not touch the sheath in the posterior part. Don't do that, please, because if you're doing that, you'll be damaging a lot of nerves, you'll be damaging a lot of vessels. So that means the anterior median part of the arcus are those areas which can be used for repair purposes. So here, remember, again, we're talking about the arcus of the pelvic fascia. This is the arcus of the levator, just to keep reminding you the two differences. This is the area from the levator, this is the area of the visceral fascia. So that's why tendinous arch of the pelvic fascia. Now, so this was the fascial concentration. We said that the endopelvic fascia is going to give rise to fibrous structures and ligaments. Now let's have a look at the ligaments arising from the endopelvic fascia. An overview: the urogenital organs, the urachus, the medial umbilical ligament. Yesterday we talked about it. The puboversical ligament, puboprostatic ligament, Female genital tract, whole lot of ligament, the four important ones: uterosacral, cardinal, round, broad. Sacrogenital, that is going from the sacrum to the genitals, uterosacral ligaments and prostatosacral ligaments. And rectum, that is the rectoprostatic and rectovaginal ligament. This was just an overview. Let's see in short what we're talking about. So if you look at the anterior segment, see this part? This is the urachus, obliterated urachus. So that is the median umbilical ligament. Okay, lateral to it is the oblique umbilical artery. Can you see this? This is the medial umbilical fold. So again, that's a ligament which is coming out here, and that it is sustained. The distal part remains as a superior vesical artery. So you have see the bladder, and these are the lateral ligaments of the bladder. So one thing which we never knew up to now was, when we talk about the abdominal cavity, now we come into the pelvis. So pelvis, we now know that the bladder is supported by the lateral pillars of the bladder, also known as the lateral ligament of the bladder, which contain the superior vesical artery. So this is the bladder, and these are lateral ligaments. Nothing but again a condensation of what? Of the arcus tendons. So that is again a condensation of the endopelvic fascia, which is found beneath the visceral fascia in the region of the bladder, and that thickening houses the superior vesical artery, and that is known as the lateral ligament of the bladder. Right? Pubovesical is the part which supports the bladder, and pubourethral are the two parts. Right? The lateral ligament supports the superior vesicle. So that means now the bladder is being supported by a number of structures. Urachus may be supporting it, the medial umbilical fold, the medial umbilical fold. In addition to that, you've got the pubovesical ligament, and the lateral pillars or the lateral ligaments of the bladder, all supporting the bladder and the proximal urethra. Okay. Now, the females, they have also got a pubocervical. Now, see this ligament going posteriorly. See the ligament, the thickening going posteriorly. That is a tissue which is going to support the upper part of the vagina and the cervix, the pubocervical ligaments. In the males, this pubovesicle also modifies itself to give rise to puboprostatic ligaments. Puboprostatic ligaments are nothing but part of the pubic vesical ligaments, right? Actually, pubovesical ligaments, with the growth of the prostate from puberty, these ligaments have the appearance of terminating in the prostate. Why? Because the bladder goes up and grows into the pelvic cavity. The prostate part of it now starts coming up, and it appears as if you've got the puboprostatic ligaments, right? So this is basically the area we're talking about. See this bladder? This is the we're talking about. This is retropubic space, and these are the ligaments. These are the ligaments, the pubovesical ligament and the pubocervical. See the green structure? So all this is what? This is all part of the arcus we're talking about, the arcus of the pelvic fascia. Okay. Now coming to the middle segment. What are the middle segment? We said in the female, the transverse cervical, the cardinal ligament, the broad ligament. The transverse cervical ligament supporting the cervix, and the broad ligament, which is the part attached to the lateral pelvic wall, and the lower part is the cardinal. The rest of it is the broad ligament, right? In the males, we just have the rectovesical septum. Just rectovesical. Why? Because just behind the prostate, you got the rectum. So the middle segment in the females is a substantial segment. In the males, there's hardly any part of the middle segment. It's just represented by the rectovesical septum, right? Now the posterior segment, you got the sacrogenital ligaments. You got the uterosacral ligament, and you got the rectoprostatic. In the males, there's no vagina in between, so you have the straight bladder and the rectum. So you got the rectoprostatic ligament, and in the females you got the uterosacral ligament. So these are just the ligaments that we wanted to enumerate and tell you what these ligaments are all about. This was just a figure. Again, we'll be referring this figure time and again. This just to give you an idea about the vessels on the lateral wall. This figure is very, very important if you want to do any kind of pelvic surgery. It's a very, very important figure, and just telling you the important parts. See, this is basically the external iliac and the internal iliac. From the internal iliac, you got the posterior division, and you've got the anterior division, right? From the anterior division, you've got the obturator. See, this obturator comes into play out here. So these are the obturator neurovascular bundles. So this is the obturator neurovascular bundle, and from here you'll have the umbilical artery, which is rising up. Not shown in this umbilical vessels. I think, yeah, they're coming out here. From here they go up. So the obturator, the umbilical vessels, and then these are vessels which are going into the pelvic organs, namely the vesicle. In the females, you got the uterine, the vaginal, and the middle rectal, and the posterior rectal coming from the posterior division. So just remember this figure. You should have a clear picture of this in your mind if you want to do any kind of pelvic surgery. And I just picked up this mnemonic from the anterior trunk branches. The mnemonic, often my sexy underwear is inside pants, and each one of them represents something. And the posterior trunk, the mnemonic is pills, and you got the ilolumbar, lateral sacral, superior gluteal artery. If you want to, for the anatomy people, it's very important. Even for the surgeons, I think we should remember this, the mnemonic, so that we know what the anterior and posterior branches are all about. Right now, the anterior part, just a few words important. Why? Because we as surgeon, we are not so much concerned with the middle segment, which is basically a segment for the gynecologist. We are basically concerned with the urogenital segment, and we are concerned with the posterior segment. Now, if you look at the urogenital segment, see the pubis, and you can see the puboprostatic ligaments. In between, you got the superficial and deep dorsal vein of the penis, right? The prostate and the bladder. So this whole thing is the retropubic space, which we were talking about yesterday. This is a sagittal view. You see the puboprostatic ligament out here. You see retropubic space pad of fat, the bladder. This is the peritoneum and the intraperitoneal structures out here, right? So the visceral pelvic fascia, it passes inward toward the center of the pelvis. From the back of the pubis, it is thickened into two bands, one on either side of the middle line, giving rise to the puboprostatic, right? So two puboprostatic. And also from the side, can you see these lines? These are again fascias, part of the endopelvic fascia. So endopelvic fascia is not only the puboprostatic, it is also merging from the walls towards the prostate and the bladder, all supporting it. See the support being provided. So from the sides from the tendinous arch of pelvic fascia on either side. So here you got the tendinous arch, which we are talking about, the arcus tendinous of pelvic fascia, sending support fibers and fibers of the puboprostatic ligament, right? Now, the visceral fascia, remember we said the parietal fascia and from the arcus. From here now what is happening to the visceral fascia? So until here it is the parietal fascia. Remember, there is a tendinous arch of the pelvic fascia. Remember, from here it becomes the visceral fascia. Now what is happening to the visceral fascia? Comes here and then it breaks into two. One part goes along the prostate, the other part ascends around the bladder. So it passes inwards toward the center of the pelvis, meets the urogenital apparatus in the midline, junction of the bladder and the prostate, that's the junctional area, and then it splits into two layers, one passing up, the other passing down. So here just I have again reminded you of the two arches, the tendinous arch of the levator ani and the tendinous arch of pelvic fascia. See again, the two, okay? Now, as the layer passes over the bladder, so what has happened? The layer is passing over the bladder from anterior to posterior on all sides, lateral to lateral, anterior, posterior. So when it is going posterior over the bladder, it gradually thins on the front and sides, but may be traced all of the bladder as a distinct and complete capsule. You can identify that. See this layer? You can identify it. But posteriorly, what happens? It becomes thickened. It's greatly thickened. The posterior surface of the bladder, this visceral fascia greatly thickens and splits into two layers on either side of the midline. So you got the midline on either side is going to split into two. Why does it need to split into two? Because it's going to enclose the seminal vesicles and the vas deferens. So up to the midline single layer, then splitting into two, enclosing the seminal vesicles, it encloses seminal vesicles and the vas deferens, and then it blend again laterally. So midline single layer becomes double layer, coating the seminal vesicles, and beyond the lateral seminal vesicles again becomes one single layer. Downwards, when it is going down, it fuses with the anterior layer of the denonvillous fascia. This is the fascia denonvillus. So this is the prostate, this is the bladder. So what has happened? The visceral fascia has come from here, broken down into two. One part of the prostate, the other part has gone and coated the bladder. Posteriorly, it became thickened, divided into two to support the seminal vesicles, recombined into one single, and then fused with the fascia of denonvillus. Is that clear? Now the layer it passes down around the prostate. This is the layer passing around the prostate. See, this is the part passing around the prostate. So let's see what this passing around the prostate is. This part which passes around the prostate forms a complete sheath. See this sheath, the visceral pelvic fascia, a complete sheath. See this sheath. And it is funnel shaped, broad at the junction between the bladder and the prostate and below, where you have the urethra. Gradually tapers, and along with the urethra there's a triangular ligament opening to the prostatic gland. So here it is going to gain a circular attachment around the opening in the perineal membrane for the passive urethra. So it's going to get an attachment out. Now, this visceral fascia is very distinct and very important. Why? See these veins? See these veins? So this is basically the visceral capsule of the prostate as opposed to the capsule of the prostate. So in between the true capsule of the prostate and the visceral capsule of the prostate, you've got these venous flexures. Fact which is very, very important when you're going for any kind of radical prostatectomy or going even for any kind of prostatectomy, even for benign diseases. Like for example, you're doing a Millen's prostatectomy. In Millen's prostatectomy, again, it is important. Not, of course, in the Freyer's type prostatectomy, but Millen's is important. This part of the anatomy is important. And very important, we talk about radical prostatectomy. So we have to understand that the prostate, the outermost capsule of the prostate is basically nothing but a offshoot of the visceral pelvic fascia. That is the part of the prostate, right? Now, let's see what is the applied importance. So the capsules of the prostate, we have been taught that there are 3 capsules of the prostate. There are 2 capsules. One is the inner prostatic capsule, which was this, the black lining. This was the false capsule, right? Now, the inner prostatic capsule, which is made of collagen, elastin, large amount of smooth muscles, is not a true capsule. It is not a capsule, but it is an outer condensed fibromuscular band, which is inseparable component of the prostatic stroma. So if you're looking at the histological feature, you won't find a clearly delineated capsule-like structure, but you'll find a thickening of certain structures in that area. And these are the collagen, elastin, large amount of smooth muscles, what was depicted as the black line out here. So this, you may like to call it true capsule, but in reality, it should not be known as true capsule, but nevertheless, it is the capsule of the prostate, with the inseparable component of the prostatic stroma. In the literature, it is always referred to as a prostatic capsule. So that is basically the prostatic capsule. Now, outer is the false capsule we just now talked about, and that is the prostatic fascia from the visceral layer. The prostatic fascia from the visceral layer. Now, anteriorly, we just now said anchored to the pubic bone by the medial and lateral puboprostatic ligaments. We said that from where it is kept back and covering the prostate and covering the bladder. Laterally merges the parietal pelvic fascia with the levator ani. Posteriorly merges the anterior, the denominal fascia. Above continuous with the vesical fascia. Just to tell you what this all means. See, so from here, the visceral fascia is coming out here, covering the prostate. So here is merging with what? Merging with the visceral, visceral fascia out here. See the visceral fascia? That is giving the covering out here. So it is blending with the fascia over the levator ani. Beyond this is what? The levator ani, right? Anterior is what? The puboprostatic capsule. So that is basically the relationship of this capsule. Okay. Now in between these two lies the posterior venous. Now the third capsule, which is a pseudo capsule, is the pathological capsule. So in reality, anatomically, there are only 2 capsules. One, the outer one, which is pseudo capsule, part of the visceral fascia. Inside, the condensation of the outer part of the gland of the prostate, which we know as the prostatic capsule. And inside that, when you have a benign enlargement of the prostate, the part of the prostatic tissue which is compressed give rise to a pseudo capsule. So that is the pseudo capsule because of the enlarging adenoma. See this. I've tried to depict this. So basically, you're looking at what? You're looking at the prostatic capsules. The red one is the pseudo capsule. The blue one is the true capsule that we know of. And the outer side is what we know as the layer of the visceral fascia. Okay. Now, the dissection planes are important when we're talking about the BEP and radical prostatectomy. That means for prostate, benign hyperplasia prostate and radical prostatectomy, the planes of intervention are very, very important. If you look at the BEP, what do you separate? You separate the adenoma. You nucleate the adenoma. So where are you working? You're working in the pseudocapsular area. You leave behind this part of the prostate. You just enucleate the adenoma. So the red line is the line of dissection when you're doing enucleation in a benign hyperplasia of the prostate. As opposed to radical prostatectomy, when you're doing a radical prostatectomy, you have to remove it beyond the fascia. So you have to go in the interfacial plane. Why? Because you want to remove everything. So if you're doing a BEP, you're removing along the blue line. When you're doing a complete prostatectomy, a radical one, you have to go to the interfacial plane. That means you have to remove the prostatic fascia along with the prostate. That means the whole of the prostate along with the pelvic fascia, that the visceral pelvic fascia, the totality, it has to be removed. That has to be removed. And that is the interfacial plane we're talking about. And behind this interfacial plane, what is lying? The denon-villus fascia. So the visceral fascia of the prostate posteriorly is flanked by the denon-villus fascia. If you see this figure, see this? Fascia coming out here and it fuses the denon-villus fascia. So there is a layer. See this particular junctional area? So that is the area we're talking about. That is the interfacial plane. Interfacial plane between the visceral fascia coating the prostate and the denon-villus fascia, which is being shown in this figure. See, that is the interfacial plane. And what is important again is the areas where you can go in for excision. Now, this plane is important for two surgeries, very important surgeries. Number one, radical prostatectomy, but more important also for a much more common disease, or as I say, equally common disease, and that is rectal carcinomas. When you want to do a rectal carcinoma and you want to do an APR, you want to remove that part of the rectum. Why? Because behind denon-villus fascia, what is lying out here? What is lying out here is the rectum. So when you have to remove the rectum, you have to decide whether you're going to remove from here or you're going to remove from here. We'll come to that when you talk about the posterior. Okay. So this shows you the capsules. Now, endophasia of the female pelvic cavity. I'm not going to spend too much time out here, but just remember that the apical prolapse is cystocele, which is very, very common, and the uterine prolapse. The bladder is being supported, I told you, by the ligaments out here, all of them, the lateral ligaments, and also the fascia between the cervix and the urethra in front. So you have the suburethral fascial layer in between the urethra and the cervix, and the anterior vaginal wall also supports all this, right? So the anterior vaginal wall support the urethra by its lateral attachments to what? To the levators and the endopelvic fascia from the ATPF. See this? So this support is going to support and prevent the formation of a cystocele. The middle compartment, what we know as the uterine prolapse, there are four ligaments what form what the pubocervical ring. And see these four ligaments. You got the transverse cervical, this is the cervix, the bladder, and this is the rectum. So this is the transverse cervical ligament. You have the pubocervical from the pubic to the cervix, pubocervical, the transverse cervical ligament. You got the rectovaginal septum here. This is the rectum and this is the cervix. So rectovaginal septum out here, and the uterosacrals. The transverse cervical ligament is nothing but the McInrod's ligament and the broad ligament together, because the lower part is the cardinal ligament. So all these are basically forming a ring around the ring around the lower part of the cervix and the upper part of the cervix. So it forms a ring and supporting everything. So there's a defect in this ring that creates a problem. Along with this, what else is there? The loose tissue in between the bladder and the anterior vaginal wall, and the loose tissue between the vagina, anterior vagina, and the rectum, what is known as the rectovaginal septum. So together, all these are going to support the whole thing. So this complex maintains the vaginal length, keeps the vaginal axis horizontal. The uterosacral ligament also provides suspension and assists in maintaining the position of the uterus and the upper vagina over the levator plane. The loose tissue around the vagina is known as the para called PL loose endopelvic fascia, also known as the pubocervical fascia, fusing laterally with the ATPF, which we have been continually referring to. So this is basically the cardinal ligament. See this cardinal ligament? This is the cardinal ligament, transverse cervical ligament, and through which you have the uterine artery. See this artery running out here? That's the uterine artery. This again the arcus or the pelvic fascia. Arcus pelvic fascia, arcus levatani. Arcus pelvic fascia sending, see all this endopelvic fascia. This whole is endopelvic fascia, which is condensed. So forming this whole broad ligament and the cardinal ligament. So arising from a broad area of the lateral pelvic wall, right? And that is what it is supporting. Anteriorly, you have the pubocervical. See the pubocervical ligament. So anterior support, lateral support, posterior support of the uterosacrals. These are the uterosacrals. So you got all kinds of support. So see the uterosacral, you got the transverse cardinal, you got the anterior. So all this is giving rise to pubocervical ring, which is going to give support to the whole structure out here. Uterosacral ligament posteriorly attached to the presacral fascia in front. See this presacral, this sacrum. Can you see the sacrum? So it attaches to the presacral fascia. Okay. Together, all these are supporting the whole of the the female genital organs. But coming to the most important part, perhaps, or equally important part for we as surgeons, and that is the rectum, rectal fascias and the mesorectum. I just like to spend some time over this. And the first thing is mesorectum. We understood what the mesorectum is. There are a number of articles in the literature and anatomists who say that there's nothing like a mesorectal fascia. It is basically just for the surgeons and oncologists. But nevertheless, we as surgeons would like to remember what the mesorectum is. So what is the mesorectum? It is nothing but a fatty tissue surrounding the rectum. See, this is the rectum, the whole of the fatty tissue. That's the mesorectum. But what's made up of? It is basically a accumulation of loose pelvic tissue along with vessels and lymph nodes. Now, it is surrounding the rectum, and see the discrepancy in the surrounding part. Posteriorly, it is thick. Okay. Laterally, it is slightly less thick, and it is thin in the anterior part. Right? On the other two sides. So, this is a structure or a condensation of fatty tissue along with associated tissues surrounding the rectum. Does it surround the rectum totally? No. It stops 2 centimeters above the puborectalis muscle. That means it doesn't surround the total rectal length. It doesn't. It stops 2 centimeters over the levator ani. What is the rectum? The rectum extends up to the inner rectal ring. What is the inner rectal ring? The levator ani. So this mesorectum is not going to go up to the levator ani. It stops 2 centimeters short. So along with this fatty tissue, what else does it contain? It contains superior rectal blood vessels. It contains draining lymph nodes, and 92% of these are located in the proximal 2/3 of the posterior mesorectum. That basically means that the major concentration of lymph nodes is found around the upper third, the mesorectum, which is there in the upper third of the rectum rather than in the middle third and the lower third. So upper third maximum, middle third slightly less, lower third hardly any. Why? Because there's hardly any mesorectum in the lower 2 centimeters part. And outside this mesorectum, there is a fascia, and that fascia is known as the mesorectal fascia, also known as the fascia propria. So fascia propria of the rectum is synonymous with mesorectal fascia. Remember that. Whenever you say fascia propria of the rectum, it is mesorectal fascia. So now we know this is the rectum, surrounded by the mesorectum, surrounded by what we know the fascia propria of the rectum or the mesorectal fascia. And inside you have the superior rectal vessel, you got number of lymph nodes, major concentration in the upper 2/3 parts, and some nerve fibers lying in the mesorectum and the peripheral mesorectum. We'll just come to that. This is a cross section which is showing a transverse cross section showing all these layers. So this is the lumen, mesorectal fat, and outside you got the mesorectal fascia. Okay. Now we will become referring to this figure time and again. So mesorectal fascia is synonymous with the fascia propria. And what is it? It is basically nothing but the visceral pelvic fascia. See, we said that when we are talking about the fascias, see this fascia, the visceral fascia coming from the arcus, it is again going to coat the rectum also. Going to coat the rectum also. So basically, the fascia propria, the mesorectal fascia, is nothing but the extension of the visceral pelvic fascia. So it is corresponding to the visceral pelvic fascia. As said earlier, not an anatomical term recognized by Terminologia Anatomica. You ask an anatomist, he will say that in their anatomical term, there is nothing like a mesorectal fascia. It is mainly a surgical and radiological term for rectal cancer staging. As said earlier, rectum mesorectum is being enclosed like a sleeve, and it extends from the beginning of the rectum and up to the levator ani. See, the mesorectal fascia is going beyond. The mesorectum has stopped. Where does it start? It starts at the rectus-sigmoid junction, blends the connective tissue of the sigmoid mesentery in its upper 2/3, fuses the peritoneum as a reflection of the rectum. What am I talking about? See, this is the area from where the mesorectal fascia is coming, right? Fascia propria or visceral pelvic fascia. So this is the part from where the rectum has started. It fuses with, remember, the upper 2/3 has got covering of the peritoneum in the upper third, different covering on the lateral sides and the anterior, middle third only in the anterior. So this visceral fascia or the fascia propria is going to fuse with all this, and here you have the sigmoid mesentery. See this? Beyond this is what? Sigmoid. From sigmoid into the rectum. So here the sigmoid mesentery. So it fuses with sigmoid mesentery, it fuses the peritoneum, and then descends down, covering whole of the rectum, and descends up to where? Up to the levator ani. Now, what about the mesorectum? Now, see the mesorectum. It has stopped short. It has stopped short. I told you this is the levator ani. See, 2 to 3 centimeters of the rectum is without any mesorectum, but it has a mesorectal fascia. The mesorectal fascia is there. You understand what I'm trying to tell you? What I'm trying to tell you is that the rectum, the lower third of the rectum, it has a mesorectal fascia, no doubt, but it is bereft of any mesorectum. There is no mesorectum. See the yellow part stops here, but the fascia continues until the levator ani. And beyond the levator ani, this fascia again continues over the anal or the proximal part of the anal region, forming what is called the anorectal sheath or the visceral pelvic fascia. The anorectal sheath of the visceral pelvic fascia, right? So this is basically a figure which will help you to understand everything, even the anterior part that we just now talked about, the interfacial plane out here. See, there's the prostate visceral fascia, and you got a interfacial plane out here, and this is the fascia propria, this is fascia denonvillus. See the middle one, denonvillus, and this is the fascia visceral fascia out here, which is lining the prostate. So this is the interfacial plane, anterior denonvillus fascia, interfacial plane posterior to the denonvillus fascia, right? And this is the extension of the visceral pelvic fascia from the rectum down into the anal canal. But the mesorectum stops 2 centimeters short of the levator ani. Clear? That means the lower most part of the rectum does not have any mesorectum. It does have a mesorectal fascia, but no mesorectum. Now, posteriorly, this fascia is thickened. It is surrounding the rectum from all sides, anterior, lateral, posterior. Posterior is very thick, right? And this is distinct from another facial line posterior to it, and that is the presacral fascia. And you can easily find a space of separation between the two, what is known as the retrorectal space, right? Retrorectal space. So this is basically retrorectal space between the rectal fascia, which is the fascia propria, and the presacral fascia. Now, presacral fascia, in the next slide, I will show you, this is a different derivative. So now this is a derivative from the visceral fascia, visceral pelvic fascia, forming the fascia propria, surrounding the rectum on all sides, separated from the bone, that is the sacrum, by another fascia known as the presacral fascia, and in between these two fascia, there's a loose connective tissue, which is the retrorectal fascia. Okay, and if you look at the lowermost part, see this part? That means the rectum is being separated from the coccyx and the lower part of the sacrum by 2 layers of fascia. See, this is the presacral fascia coming out here, fusing with the fascia propria. See the two? This is the presacral fascia in front of the sacrum. This is the fascia propria or the visceral pelvic fascia. They're fusing. So that means the rectum is separated from the bone by 2 layers of fascia, namely the parietal and visceral layer, because this is derived from the parietal layer. The presacral fascia is the derivative of the parietal pelvic fascia. Remember, we talked about that the fascia is going to start from the pubic bone and then going and joining the sacrum medial to the medial foraminals, right? So this is a junctional plane between the parietal and the visceral fascia, separating the bone from the posterior surface of the rectum. Laterally, the mesorectal fascia extends and becomes contiguous with the rectovesical fascia in male. So here you have got the rectovesical fascia. See, this is the fascia. So it becomes continuous with that, right? Now, at the back, or rather, in the front, you have the prostate. See, the seminal vesicles, and here it is prostate, and here you got the fascia denonvillus. See the fascia denonvillus. So anteriorly, it is being separated from the prostate by the denonvillus fascia. Posteriorly, from the sacrum, separated by the parietal or the presacral fascia. Laterally, it's separated from the walls of the pelvis by the lateral ligaments of the rectum. This is the rectum, this is the lateral ligaments. Okay. Now, The parietal pelvic fascia, which we just now alluding to, the presacral fascia. Now, what is this presacral fascia? This is nothing but the part of the membranous parietal fascia, right? Which is fused with the periosteum of the sacrum. We can't separate it. You can't separate it. The more you try separating it, what's going to happen? See these veins out here? The presacral veins lying underneath the presacral fascia. The presacral fascia is nothing but an extension of the parietal fascia, going like this. Parietal membranous fascia coming here. This is the visceral pelvic fascia. In between, you got the endopelvic area, all this endopelvic area. So this is fused. And the moment you try to separate this, you have troublesome bleeding. And this bleeding is so troublesome that often you're not able to stop it. The only thing we can stop this bleeding is packing and nothing else. Is that clear? So the presacral fascia lines the anti-aspal sacrum, enclosing the sacral vessels and nerves. The nerves are going to come out from the foramina. Here you got what? You got the canal, the vertebral canal. From here the nerves are coming. So the nerves are going to lie behind the presacral fascia. And if they have to enter the pelvis, they have to perforate the presacral fascia, right? So when these nerves, the sacral nerves, come out from the sacrum, they perforate the parietal fascia. And when they perforate the parietal fascia, only then they can enter into the pelvic cavity. See, exiting from the sacral foraminals, they have to lie behind the parietal pelvic fascia, and only then they can make contact with the other nerves out. They pierce the fascia and carry a part of the fascia as a sheath along with it. Okay, and this is the area of the arcus, which is known as the hypogastric sheath. See this area? We talk about this area. This is the area. This is the area. See this nerve out here? That's the nerve depicted out here. See this fascia out here? The presacral fascia. This is the presacral fascia. That's the presacral fascia, right? In between these two fascias is what is known as the holy plane of the transmesorectal excision. Is an avascular area. So that means between the visceral, this fascia propria, derivative of the visceral pelvic fascia. Understandable. This is parietal pelvic fascia, derivative of the parietal fascia, that is the presacral fascia. In between these two is what? The endopelvic. Endopelvic is loose fascia without any vessels in this particular area. And that's why it's known as the holy plane or the avascular area, completely avascular area. What about these lateral ligaments we're talking about? What is this lateral ligament? This was whenever you're doing an APR or you're doing a low resection or a low anterior section of the rectum for a rectal carcinoma. We've been repeatedly made to understand that you have to look for the lateral ligaments of the rectum. Now they believe there is nothing like an entity as a lateral ligament of the rectum, but still there is a condensation of tissue out there in the lateral part. It's a distal condensation of mesothelial fascia at the lateral border of the rectum, which attaches to the lateral sides of the pelvis. See, attaching it. The ligamentive structure, representative ligamentive structure. What does it have? Blood vessels and nerves, which are surrounded by areolar tissue. Now here lies the catch. Which blood vessel and which nerves are we talking about? Along with that, lymphatic. Now, why is this lateral ligament so important? The reason is simple. Number one, it could be having the middle rectal artery in it. Number two, a number of lymphatics which drain towards the internal iliac group of lymph nodes. Here you will be having the internal iliac group of lymph nodes. So from here, there is a direct communication with the internal iliac group of lymph nodes or lateral pelvic lymph nodes, right? Now, this lateral ligament, I said earlier, is the hypogastric sheath, which we are talking about. Okay, so this lateral ligament has got number one, artery, lymphatic. Is that the only reason why it's important? No, absolutely not. The most important thing is the nerves which lie in this lateral ligament, the nerves which lie out here. That is the most important part. And this lateral rectal ligament has got a pelvic plexus to it. Now, see, these are the sacral nerves coming out, covered by the sacral fascia. They came and now they are lying where? They're lying in the lateral wall of the pelvis. This is the area of the lateral ligament. And here they make contact with what? With the inferior hypogastric plexus. See the inferior hypogastric plexus. The inferior hypogastric plexus is found where? It is found in the wall, very near to the wall of the rectum. See, this is the rectum and this is the bladder. So you find it very near to them. And here they go and make what is known as the pelvic plexus. So pelvic plexus is nothing but a plexus formed by the parasympathetic sacral fibers and the sympathetic inferior hypogastric plexus. So they together they make what? They make the pelvic plexus, which is lying very near to the wall of the rectum in the lateral ligament. How near? How near? See, only 1 centimeter away from the rectal wall. And are they concentrated or are they lying all along? No, the maximum concentration is at 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock of the circumference of the rectum. At the two spots, you'll find the maximum concentration of this rectal fascia, which is one of the lateral ligament of the rectum. So, what does it tell you? What are the importance? Why are they so important? The reason is simple. If you do a dissection too far laterally, you're going to damage all these nerves. And the moment you damage these nerves, you're going to have a lot of problems with erectile dysfunctions, you will have incontinence of the bladder, and the patient will be after you lifelong. So remember, whenever you're going in for lateral dissection in malignancy of the rectum, you have to be very careful that you don't go too far laterally, damaging these plexus, because you'll have disastrous results. Number one. Number two, for God's sake, never do a blunt dissection in this area. Never do a blunt dissection here. Never do a blunt dissection in the mesorectum, which is lying out here. Never do it. Blunt dissection, you're liable to damage the nerves. And that's why what has been advised is a sharp dissection in this area. If you're in the correct plane, you'll have minimal bleeding and you'll not be damaging any nerve. So remember one thing, sharp dissection, no blunt dissection, and not too far lateral dissection when you're talking about the lateral ligament. See the reason what we said. So dissect it close to the mesorectal fascia, not too far laterally. See far laterally what's happening. You have this nerve. You go too far laterally, you try to remove more and more. You decide, let me be more radical, let me remove everything. No chance of having a local recurrence. And in that event, what do? You damage these nerves. You're damaging these nerves. So remember, it should be nearer to the mesorectal fascia, should not be too lateral, should be sharp, should not be blunt dissection. Is that clear? So that is why it is important. And I said earlier, you don't have a ligamentous structure as such. Now they say that's not a true ligamentous structure, it is just loose areolar tissue. This again a figure which I found very interesting. You see this is the sacrum, the parietal fascia, the visceral fascia, and in between, see this layer? There's the layer, the holy plane in between the visceral and the parietal fascia. That is from where the dissection should occur. Then there's the mesorectum. Mesorectum is being lined by what? The mesorectal fascia, which is what? Visceral fascia. And here see the hypogastric nerve. Can you see this nerve coming out here? That's the hypogastric nerve coming from the lateral part. So when you're doing a dissection, you don't damage this nerve. That means the dissection should be here, saving the hypogastric. Because the moment you do a dissection here, you're going to damage the hypogastric nerve. Okay. Now, just two more fascias about the rectum, and then we're finished. The Waldes fascia, very important. What are the Waldes fascia? Now, if you look at this figure again, the two, the presacral fascia and the visceral fascia, the fascia propria, are joined by a fascia known as the Waldes fascia. It is nothing but a dense connective tissue which links these two fascias. And the origin of this Waldes fascia is from the presacral parietal and could be at three spots, from S2, S3 or S4 segment. 46% of the time it is from S4 segment. See the S4 segment? Maximum time S4, S5, COP6, S4, S5, S5, S4, S3, and so on and so forth. So maximum it is lower down rather than higher up. So it can arise anywhere from S2 to S4 level, from the presacral fascia to the fascia propria. Okay? And where does it join the fascia propria? This is the levator ani, about 3 to 5 centimeters above the levator ani. 3 to 5 centimeters. Remember, at this point, the mesorectum is still present. Mesorectum stopped where? 2 centimeters. So 3 to 5 centimeters, the mesorectum is still there. And this Waldes fascia is now dividing this retrorectal space in two parts. The presacral space and the inferior, the superior and the inferior. This is the superior, which is known as the true presacral space, and the inferior, which is the supralevator space, right? Why? Because here the levator, so this is supralevator. So this is also known as the infra-retrorectal or supralevator. This superior, retrorectal or presacral. Clear? So if you want to just remember anatomically, superior and inferior retrorectal, the superior also known as presacral, the inferior also known as supralevator. Simple. Now, the original Waldes description, why this red? The original Waldes description was different. He didn't define this as a Waldes fascia. He said that this was a fascia which is lying in the inferior limit of the retrorectal space formed by the fusion of rectal, visceral, and parietal fascia. That means he was saying that this is the Waldes fascia. So Walday, when he divided the fascia, when he defined the fascia or named the fascia, he was defining this, the fusion between the visceral and the parietal. That was Walday's for him. But now what we understand as Walday's fascia is the fascia which is joining the parietal to the visceral from starting anywhere from S2 to S4 and combining or joining the visceral anywhere 3 to 5 centimeters above the levator. Is that clear? And dividing the space into superior and inferior. Why the importance of this? The importance is usually seen in those cases where you have a parietal abscess and the therapeutics of parietal abscess. If you look at these spaces, I'll be showing you in one of the figures again. So what's the clinical significance? One, that if you want to enter, if you want to do a excision of the rectum, anterior section, lower anterior section, or APR, or very low anterior section, whichever one you want to do, you have to enter this plane. Why? Because in TME, you have to enter this plane. You have to remove this. The whole of the fascia is to be removed anterior to the presacral. So if you have to remove it, you have to enter this space. So if you're entering it from the above, that means intra-abdominal, you have to cut the Walday's fascia before you can enter and see the coccyx. So if you want to see the coccyx from the intra-abdominal approach, you'll have to cut the Walday's fascia. While if you are doing a perineal approach, if you want to enter the rectorectal, superior rectorectal space, you have to cut the Walday's fascia. So subdivision from the pelvic apsid allows exposure to the coccyx. From the perineal aspect, can enter the deep pelvic cavity and the presacral space. So either entering from here or here, the Walday's fascia has to be cut in either instance before you can go in for a complete mesorectal excision, right? Now, blunt dissection of this fascia, especially with the hand, should never be done. The moment you try to do a blunt dissection of this fascia, you're going to strip the presacral fascia off. And the moment you have stripping of the presacral fascia, what's going to happen? Bleeding, bleeding, and bleeding, and you will not be able to stop the bleeding. So that is a very, very troublesome bleeding from the presacral venous flexure. It can even be mortal. Let me tell you that. If it's not stopped by packing, you can even lose the patient on the day. That's very important. And then there is another fascia in front. So the fascias that we were talking about posteriorly Walday. So what other thing is important about the Walday's fascia? This forms a barrier. It forms a barrier to the posterior spread of malignancy towards the retrorectal space into the mesorectum. See, this would form a barrier. So Walday's fascia forms a posterior barrier, a barrier to the posterior spread of rectal malignancy of the lower third of the rectum, not of the upper third, lower third, because only found in the lower third. Okay. Now coming to the next one, and that is the denominal fascia. So we had this fascia which was the visceral, we had the fascia as a parietal in relation to the rectum, and we now again had a fascia posterior to the rectum. So now we have understood three fascias: the fascia propria, the presacral fascia, and the Walday's fascia. And now we are talking about a fascia which is lying anterior to it, and that is the Denon-Villiers fascia. Denon-Villiers fascia is the fascia which is lying in between the prostate bladder anteriorly and the rectum posterior. Okay, in the males, and in the female it is easier to understand. Why? Because only the posterior wall of the vagina is in between. That is the fascia of Denon-Villiers. Appears a shiny white surface. Now there's a debate whether it is single layer or double layer. There's no consensus to date about its origin, from where is it arising, or the structure. Present as an unimportant rectovaginal septum in the females, not very worried. Why? Because if at all we find there's infiltration, you can remove the posterior wall of the vagina. Excuse me. So you're not much worried about the fascia Denon-Villiers in the female. If you look at the origin, embryologically, there are three theories which say that number one is a peritoneal fusion of the embryonic cul-de-sac. Embryonic cul-de-sac, it fuses. This is the cul-de-sac. See the cul-de-sac? It fuses, the terminal part fuses and gives rise to the Denon-Villiers fascia. So this was the cul-de-sac fusing. Number two, condensation of the embryonic mesenchyme. There is a condensation of the endopelvic fascia out here. Number three, mechanical pressure, the mesenchymal tissue, because of the growth of the rectum posteriorly and growth of prostate and bladder anteriorly, it applies mechanical pressure, and that gives rise to the exclusion or formation of a Denon-Villiers fascia. So three theories for the origin. Okay, you may like to follow whichever one you want. Now, The anterior extraperitoneal rectum. Again, we have come back to the same figure. See, when we're talking about the prostate. Now, in the region of the seminal vesicles, it's more adherent to the mesorectal fascia, fascia propria. What does that mean? It basically means that if this is the area of the seminal vesicle, the adhesion between the fascia propria, denoted by the blue line, and the blue line, which is really the area over the seminal vesicles lying out here, this adherence is tight, and you can't differentiate the two layers in this particular area. Lateral to the seminal vesicles, remember, the denominus fascia divides into multiple lamina, and one layer extends dorsolaterally and the other goes medial. See, denominus fascia, one is going dorsolaterally, other is going anterolaterally, antero and dorsolaterally. And why is it important? For the simple reason that in this junction, you find the neurovascular bundle at 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock. See the neurovascular bundle? 2 o'clock and 10 o'clock. So the denonvillous fascia, see the rectum out here? You got the fascia propria, the black line. You got the denonvillous fascia out here, and you got the prostatic fascia out here. Okay. Now here you'll find the neurovascular bundle. So you can have 4 methods of approach when you're doing a radical prostatectomy. Either you can cut from here. The neurovascular bundle is absolutely safe. You go at B. So A is what? Intrafacial plane. You're going inside the fascia. See? That's the intrafacial plane. B is the interfacial. You're going in between the prostatic fascia and the denonvillous. See this arrow? So that's the interfacial plane. Right? This is the extrafacial plane. It's gone beyond the denonvillous fascia. See the blue line and gone beyond. Right? With partial preservation of neurovascular bundle. So this part has been preserved. And C2 is a extrafacial without preservation of the neurovascular bundle. So you got 4 approaches to radical prostatectomy. 4 approaches to radical prostatectomy. Number 1, intrafacial. You're leaving behind part of the visceral fascia. The interfacial, you're going in between the prostatic fascia and the denonvillous. The extrafacial, partial and extrafacial total. That means you're gone beyond the denonvillous also. In one, you're preventing damage to the neurovascular bundle partially. In the other, you're totally removing the neurovascular bundle with all its attendant problems. Now, if you look at the neurovascular bundle, it's not as simple as that. Why? Because certain twigs have been found to be embedded in the denonvillous fascia also. There are many communicating branches coming from the bilateral pelvic plexus on the ventral side of the DV. These communicating branches are related to the urogenital function. That means here, what do you have? Remember, we said the pelvic plexus, lateral pelvic fascias. So there are a number of branches in denonvillous. So any kind of surgery in denonvillous fascia is going to damage this neurovascular bundle and fibers which are embedded in the denonvillous fascia. And that is where the problem with rectal fascia arises. So what is the applied importance when you're talking about the rectal malignancy? So anterior, the posterior plane of dissection was very easy. We said in trans mesorectal excision, the posterior plane is very clear. You go in between the visceral fascia, the fascia propria, and the presacral. You got a very good plane. You got a very good plane. This is a very good plane. You're going here. That is the part we're going. But here, where do you go? Where do you go out here? Here, I know I'm going to go in front of the presacral. Clear, nothing, no problem. But what about anteriorly? Where do I go anteriorly? Anteriorly, whether I should include the denonvillous fascia with the rectal wall or I should go here. So either I'm going here or I'm going here because rectum is here. So either I leave the denonvillous fascia along with the prostate or I take the denonvillous fascia along with the rectum. Now, there is no optimal surgical plane in front of the rectum. And there is no absolute recommendation that this should be done. It would all depend where is the growth. So if you have a growth in the posterior wall of the rectum, that basically means what? That basically means you have a rectal growth here. A rectal growth here in the posterior wall. So you're not worried about this. What you can do, you can safely go in this plane. You can safely go in this plane. That means leave the denonvillous fascia posteriorly, remove the rectum along with the fascia propria. Agreed? But if you have a growth in the anterior wall of the rectum, you have a growth here, what is going to happen? It is going to partially invade or would be in close proximity to the fascia of Denon Villiers. Now, fascia Denon Villiers also acts as an impediment to the anterior spread. Posterior spread is being prevented by Walde's in the lower third, and the lower third, the posterior spread is being prevented by Denon Villiers fascia. But if you have a growth in the anterior part, the chances of proximity to the Denon Villiers fascia is very much there. And that is why if you have an anteriorly situated growth in the lower third of the rectum, remove the Denon Villiers fascia. That means now you're going in between the prosthetic fascia and the Denon Villiers fascia. So remember, posterior part of the growth, posterior part of rectum, if you have a growth, you leave the Denon Villiers fascia along with the prostate. If you have it in the anterior part of the rectum, you remove the Denon Villiers fascia along with the rectum. So you go to the interfacial plane in between the prosthetic fascia and the Denon Villiers fascia. Right? Now, what is important out here is that you have to have a radical dissection rather than preventing the nerve and damage to the vessels. Because radicality is probably more important, saving the patient is more important rather than trying to save the nerves and having a recurrence on your hand later on. So what is going to decide whether Denon Villiers fascia is going to be left behind or not, basically meaning whether they're going to dissect behind or in front of Denon Villiers fascia, would be the radicality, the need for the radicality of removal of the rectum, right? So if summing up the ligaments, the investing layer, the parietal, the lateral ligaments, Walde's fascia, Denon Villiers fascia, right? And applied anatomy, we already talked about. If you damage this presacral fascia, you're going to have bleed from the presacral veins, disruption of the pelvic fascia propria, you're going to have a increased chance of recurrence and vascular bleed if you are going beyond. Holy pleural dissection is in between the presacral and the mesorectal fascia. This is just a figure that I wanted to show you. This was just, I got it from the net again. This total mesorectal excision, the growth laterally. This whole thing is the mesorectal fascia. Total excision has been done. Mesorectal fascia, total excision has been done. The perirectal spaces are again important. Just I think this last slide. So we have got the retrorectal, you have got the superior retrorectal and the inferior retrorectal. Inferior retrorectal, we said, is also known as the supralevator. And this is the Walde's fascia. See this? And beneath there's the levator and iron. Beneath that, you've got the two postanal spaces, the superficial and deep postanal. So simple. Superficial and deep postanal, superficial and deep retrorectal, if you want to remember that way. So you have got the superficial postanal, the deep postanal, you got the supralevator, and you got the retrorectal space. Thank you for your time. I hope I have made something clear as far as the pelvic fascia is concerned, because as soon as you hear the name endopelvic fascia and pelvic fascia, everything becomes so jumbled up in the mind that you don't know what you're talking about. So with this clear understanding, especially of these two arches, the archal tendons and the arcus pelvic fascia, now we know where we're putting in the sutures when we are doing a repair of a cystocele or doing a repair of the rectal prolapse, and probably more clear as to what is happening when we're doing excision of the rectal carcinoma or you're doing a radical prostatectomy. If you have any question, you can post them on our WhatsApp. Thank you for your time. I think that would be all. Good afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.